Hey, everybody. We've got a really great guest for you today in Cooke, and we're going to be talking about why SQL is the skill that every data professional needs to learn. So here's a little window into some of the things that we're going to be getting into in the show. It'll be more of a free-flowing conversation, not necessarily perfectly linear, but we'll promise that we'll at least cover these topics for you. So with that, let's get into the core of it. So Thais, what is it that you think makes SQL such a central tool that it's used in so many different types of data roles? Like, what is it about SQL?
So SQL is how we communicate with our database. Our data lives there, and we have to speak the language of the database to get the data that we need. So you can be a data analyst, a data scientist, a data engineer, or any other type of data professional. Chances are you're going to cross paths with SQL at some point in your career. And the thing too about SQL, I know great data professionals who say, oh, but the tool that I use the most is Excel, the tool that I use the most is Tableau or Power BI. But the beautiful part about SQL is that it integrates so well with so many other tools. So you can go in SQL and let's say you're going to pull a couple, 2, 3 columns, do an aggregate function and group by and call it a day and export. Or you can go all the way to be a SQL developer and do store procedures, UDFs, and all of that, and pretty much anything in the spectrum. So there is so much that can be done. And that's why I think SQL is really a cornerstone for any data professional.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you brought up that it pairs so nicely with the other tools. I personally started as an Excel jockey for like the first 5 years of my career, and then I learned SQL, and those two work so well together. There's like a million use cases from maybe you're pulling the data in SQL and you quick charts in Excel is one example, but there's a ton of them. So I think that's a really, really good point. And like you said, SQL is how we access our data, and that's really true at like almost every company. So the demand is just huge there. Yeah, that's really great. I'm curious, Thais, what are some of the specific things that you are using SQL for on the job? And don't give away any proprietary information or anything like
Of course. No, of course. No, I can talk about the workflow on how I use SQL. And it has changed a little bit. When I first started, I was going to SQL pretty much just access my data to get the data. So I would put the data that I needed and, like I said, do some aggregate functions, but get most of the data and exporting to Excel, going to Power Query, and do majority of my transformations in data there. And that is still a very valid approach. I'm not telling people to don't do this, no, not saying this in any way. But when I started getting requests, that was more involved. The scope was really specific, and there were a lot of transformations in this data. And the data started to get more robust, and there were lots and lots of rows that I was pulling. I just started feeling that Power Query was getting a little bit slow, more on the slower side, to go through all of those transformations and then load. So got to a point that I said, you know what? I have two choices here. I can either figure this out in Power Query and see what I can do. I don't know if there's a way or not, to be honest. Or I can really get good in SQL and do majority of my transformations there, majority of my data cleaning there, majority of my data manipulation there, and go as far as I can in SQL and then export to whatever the tool I need to export. So that's the choice that I made. I start getting more into the deep coding and the cleaning and all of that. And I just fell in love with SQL. So, and that's how it was. And that's how it has evolved.
Yeah, it's so funny. It seems like, you came to SQL because you sort of outgrew the old process that you were using it for. I'm the exact
Yeah.
same way. I was doing my process. I was basically using Excel as a database a long
Yeah.
time ago. Power Query wasn't really out yet.
Yeah.
And so I was maxing out on rows and doing
Yeah.
things that today seem ridiculous in spreadsheets entirely, and had to figure out another way. And same thing, had to learn and just found that it was so similar to the things that you're doing in Excel or Power Query, but then it has like this huge layer of just performance and power that that
Yeah.
really can be problematic in some of those other tools. So
Yeah.
so yeah, love hearing how your journey's gone there. I'm
Yeah.
curious, what do you think about long term for SQL? Do you think this is a tool that's around forever? You know, is it gone in 5 years because of AI? Like, what do you think?
I think SQL is here to stay. It has been around since the 1970s. I wasn't even born when SQL came. So when SQL came around, and just the way that the SQL is structured and the logic of how SQL is built. And if you think about SQL, really has stood the test of time.
Yeah,
Think about now we have cloud data warehouses. We have Snowflake, we have BigQuery. And even in there to query the data from there, and I understand the syntax is different, of course, the flavor is different, but it is still SQL at the end of the
yeah,
day. It is still SQL like language that you're using. So, with all of that, I still believe that they need to store this data and to query this data and analyze the data. The need is still going to be there. And as far as AI goes, I remember this was a while ago. I maybe, I don't know, maybe last year, I listened to a podcast where the interviewer, it was not somebody that was in data, was not in data at all. And he was saying, oh, learning how to code, I would never advise anybody to learn how to code nowadays. If we could go back in time, I wouldn't advise that. And I strongly disagree with that. I
yeah,
think AI is great. It's an amazing tool. I go there, get stuck on a code, I go there.
yep,
It's fine. But the amount of times where I ask AI for, hey, help me with this code, and then the code came, and wait a
yep,
second, this is not right. And I have literally argued with AI, hey, the code that you gave me is not exactly what I'm looking for. And then, oh, apologies for the oversight. Here's the right code. And I have to keep going back and forth.
yep,
But the only reason that I can go back and forth is because I know how to code. I know that from the beginning. So I have the basis to go. And it gets scary when you think about somebody who doesn't know any of this. Imagine somebody who doesn't know how to code and goes to AI, hey, give me the code for this. AI gives a code. And you put in there and then you take business decisions based on that.
yep.
I just keep imagining without validation, without somebody that knows there's going to pinpoint errors. So I think it's still to know and to have those the basis and know what validating those outputs is going to be essential for sure. So
Yeah.
still need to know.
Yeah, I love that perspective. I mean, I could not
Mhm.
possibly be more aligned with you on that perspective. And I think,
Yeah.
you can use these AI tools,
Mhm.
specifically LLMs, because you have a strong foundation. And so you can use it as an accelerant.
Mhm.
You can check their work. But
Mhm.
people think they're like, oh, because there's AI that can produce code, will it even run? If it runs, will it be correct? Does it know the difference between like an inner and a left
Mhm.
join and why that matters? Those types of
Mhm.
things. I think you really need to have a good foundation for that. And so it's
Mhm.
funny to me when people say like, "Oh, you won't need to know how to do SQL." Yeah, good luck trying. You know,
Good luck.
good luck because like basically everybody on this call in the audience would be
Mhm.
a SQL expert if that were true, right? They could just go to
Yeah.
ChatGPT but they're
Yeah.
coming here because they want to learn,
Yeah.
because you really do need that solid foundation. And then once you have it, just like going to Stack Overflow was useful in the past to look up syntax, this can be
Yeah.
useful and it definitely can accelerate some things. But do not think that you can skip over learning the basics. Couldn't agree with you more on that one. I'm curious, Thais, so you mentioned things like Snowflake, DBT, sort of like as SQL variants, almost like they're working on a relational database, and that's sort of how you're accessing these things. Even within SQL, there's MySQL, there's Postgres, SQLite. I'm curious, in your opinion, like if you were to learn one flavor of SQL, like say you learn Postgres or you learn MySQL, and then you had to transfer to use T-SQL or something else like at another company, how hard is that pivot from one to another versus initially learning the first flavor?
Honestly, it's not hard at all. I have done this when I first started. So this is actually a funny story. When I first started learning SQL, I started on Microsoft SQL Server. I started in SQL. That's how I started. And then I jumped into a platform to take extra courses, but the platform used PostgreSQL. And then in the platform was showing me limit instead of top that we're using in SQL Server. And I tried to do SQL Server saying limit, and it wasn't working. And for the life of me, I'm like, but it says here I have to use limit. Why this is not working? And it took me some time to, oh, there are different flavors. Okay, I didn't know that. I did not know that. So it really is not that hard. There's certain things like to do an aggregate function distinct. It's a little different from one flavor to the next, but it's really small details. And if you run, let's say that you run a distinct count or count distinct, something like this, and it gives you the error, Google the error, and you're going to see that it's all ChatGPT the error, let's say, and you're going to see that it's really just a matter sometimes of just tweak the syntax a little bit. It's really not that hard.
Yeah, I completely agree. And again, I feel like we're on the same page about so many things on this one today. This is the same way I learned initially using Microsoft SQL. That's where I learned it at work. I then switched to a company that used MySQL. And initially, it was really hard for me to learn SQL at first. That was the big hump, just getting the basic blocking and tackling, how do two tables relate, that type of thing. But then, going from Microsoft to MySQL, and then later I did Postgres at another company. Literally, I'm up and running on day one because I've got the hard stuff out of the way, and it's the same thing I hit. Just like you said, limit, top. I mean, like we both teach SQL courses. I have courses that I teach SQL in, and I still mix up limit and top in my day-to-day work as a data analyst right now. And I go, oh yeah, so it's just they're little things, but 99% of the language, it's all based on the same universal standard. So yeah, totally agree with you on that one. What do you think are some of the most valuable skills that a data analyst could learn in SQL, or maybe something that's underrated? Maybe we go two questions there. Valuable and underrated.
Well, sure. I think I'm not even going, before I jump into specific functions in SQL, I actually going to take a step back because this is something that actually happened to me too. Learn really well things like what is a dimension table versus a fact table? What is a primary key versus a foreign key? Kind of, how to do those, because normalization of tables. Because I remember when I was learning, and I'm okay, select from when, doing all of those things, and then I read them. Okay, sure, great, fine, show me the code. That's the fun part. I want to keep doing this. And when I got into joins, and more specifically, when I got into real life data, real world data, that's when I saw how important it is to know those concepts. Because now we really applying to real life scenarios, business cases scenarios, and to keep the quality of the data and the integrity of the data is extremely important. So do not skip that. That's an underrated skill. This is something that is always mentioned in courses, But I'm guilty of having done this. Oh, I'm just gonna take a quick look. It's fine. I'll figure it out. But it's something that it's a foundation for everything else. And but if I'm going to talk about SQL syntaxes, I made a post recently about case statement. I absolutely love doing a good case statement in there, combined with especially because you can combine with other things like the like operator, and there is so much you can do with the case statement. I absolutely love that. And another thing, this might be a little bit more advanced, or maybe not, is when I learn how to do the declare variable.
Yep.
This is very, especially if you have that very big complex query, and let's say that you have to run that query every month, let's say, then you can just set a variable for that month and you keep running, to different. Those two were very good skills to learn. And this actually my sound almost a little silly is the and or operator, because to know what you're going to, and you including everything, or you excluding something, and sounds something so silly, like, oh, this is so obvious, but when you actually get to the real life, okay, what is this question again? Do I have to include this or not? So definitely get into this. And if you're going to do something a little more advanced, let's say you have to join, I don't know, I say 10 different tables. A very helpful thing for me, at least, that I really like was the temp tables. I love good temp tables to break down my query into smaller chunks and work on the logic before joining everything together. So I think those are all pretty good, from basic to more advanced. I think those are my favorite things to use.
Yeah, I love it. All right, so case statements, and an or logic, which, like you said, can be simple, but sometimes can trip people up. The best way, I think, is just like play with it, change some stuff, get comfortable using parentheses around things if you have multiple conditions. And then what was the last? Oh, temp tables. Yeah, so temp tables or CTEs or subqueries. How do you feel about temp table versus a CTE or versus a subquery? Like, where do you come out on that one?
Okay, I am not a big fan of subquery. Sometimes I have to use it. There's no other way around, and I have to use it. I particularly am not a big fan of that. Apologies to everybody who is. Okay, at the end of the day, it's about getting the job done. For me, not a big fan. CTEs, I like the CTEs. I imagine CTE almost like let me see if I can explain this, almost like a post-it with certain code, and then I get out of that post-it what I want. That makes any sense. But I'm a big fan of temp tables just because it just runs so fast. And it, like I say, if I have, I have had situations where I had to join 12 tables to make one statement, and just to work through the logic before in those small temp tables, and then joining it together at the end. It's magic. For me, it's magic. And one time I tried to, okay, let me get out of the temp tables and try to do those connections directly. And it was a mess. It was a mess, not only for my own logic, but for readability too. If I have to send this to somebody else to read that code, those temp tables are so nice and organized. And with a good comment, trust me, people are gonna love you if you put good comments there.
Yes. So. Definitely love that you threw comments in there. That will help your coworkers if they're going to use your code. That'll help your future self, because you might think, hey, I spent 2 hours putting this SQL script together, this complicated thing. I'm always going to remember this. Absolutely not. Like, if you come back a year later, no chance you will remember even ever making this code. Like, I have code that does some of the processes for Maven that I look at and I go, I literally don't remember writing this. And luckily I do comment for my future self, so I can go back and I can get into it. It was so interesting that you said temp tables at the top of your list. So I feel like I hear a lot of people talk about CTEs, not talk about temp tables as much. And it seems like everybody who does this for a living for a long time is usually puts subqueries on the bottom of the list. And I actually agree with you that for me, for most of the applications that I use, I put top temp tables at the top as well. I think they're a little bit underrated. And to me, one of the big things that I think puts them ahead of CTEs is the ability to throw an index on a temp table. So if you have like a massive data set, like when one of my first SQL jobs, we were basically wrangling just enormous data for this big public company. And that was our job. It was a very technical role. And the challenge was handling massive amounts of data kind of before a lot of the newer big data processes were in place. And so temp tables are great for that. They can make your code run really fast because you can put indexes on them.
Yes. And what I love about temp tables too, let's say you can, I mean, this is just a way that I organize myself. Let's say that you have customers, orders, but inside customers, you have to join 3 different tables that are related to customers. Then you do job table, hashtag customers, and everything related to customers. You join those tables then orders, everything there. It just makes so much more readable. And if in the future I have to, okay, I don't need this table anymore, I can just go to that temp table and change instead of changing my entire logic at the end. So
I love that. That's a really good point too, that it makes it a little more modular, you know, versus like if you were trying to just put it in as like the 15th join in a mega query, then you have to figure out, okay, which table did this come from versus sort of these individual components that it can be really clear. And we do the same thing like at Maven, which I think a lot of the folks in the audience are familiar with. Say we had one of our students and we wanted to see like how many courses have they completed, how many badges have they earned, how many guided projects have they completed, things like that. Do they have a portfolio that they've built? And those could potentially be like 4 different temporary tables that all we've kind of cleaned to like a flat file that's based on the customer ID, like Thais is saying. And then at the end, you have these nice things. You do one final join, you bring them all together. I love that. That's personally how I usually operate too. So it's, man, we're really, it'll be interesting if we disagree with anything at all today.
I know. We do the same practice, I guess, in SQL.
So it's great. Easy guess today for me. How about for folks who are like brand new day one or like have maybe a little bit experience, but not much? If they want to learn and want to get good with SQL, what are some of the things that you think they should focus on first to get moving?
Okay, day one, I would say start on the basics. Select from where, play around with that. Then you go to an aggregate function, group by, and play around. Get the knowledge really, really cemented into your brain. And I am trying to put myself in the shoes of if anybody's listening there, hey, I don't know SQL. You guys are talking about temp tables. What is this?
So, that's a good point.
Listen, I have been there and I had this fear of missing out. There's so much to learn. I'm never going to catch up. But do step by step, really. This is a marathon. It's not a sprint. There's no deadline. You have to know this by the end of the month. No, please just take step by step. And once you get that, then you move forward with date manipulation. It's another thing that might take some time to manipulate dates. That always, sometimes also kind of, I get a little confused with dates too. Case statements, like I said, I would consider them more of intermediate. And then you get your joins. Pause a second for the joins. There was, I think, looking back, nowadays, yes, I know joins, but looking back, there was, I believe it was the concept that took me the longest to learn, that took me the longest to, okay, join on what now? Join where? What is the primary key? It goes back to what I said before. Know the primary key, know the foreign key, know how to do those joins well to keep the integrity of your data. So take some time there, review everything that you did. And I felt once I learned joins, and then I went into CTEs, subquery CTEs, temp tables, it kind of became a little more, I wouldn't say easier, but more intuitive
Yep.
afterwards. And last but not least, window functions. And let me tell you, window functions was something that every time I would see a partition by, I would run. I'm like, no,
Yep.
no, not doing this. I'm not doing partition, but I'm not doing this. This is confusing. Window functions are confusing. And but once I start learning how to partition the data in a window function and do a row number versus a rank and things like that, I just felt like a wizard, really, with the data. I just felt that I could really do so much more with the data. And don't be afraid of going, I'm not going to sit and say, hey, I know window functions like the back of my hand, because I don't. I still use Google. I still forget syntaxes, but just to know how they work. And I think if you have these, go through the basics, intermediate to more advanced. Stop there, and I think with that, you probably have a good, very robust skill in SQL.
Yeah.
Later on, if after you land a entry-level data position, let's say that you want to follow this path. Hey, I want to be a SQL developer. Then you worry about other things such as store procedures or UDFs or things like that. Don't worry about this right now. Don't,
Yep.
because you don't know what your path is going to be once you land your first job in data. So, but I think if you have those, at least you get the entry-level job, that's a very robust set.
Yeah, I think that's really, really good advice. I love I love that you say start with the simple stuff like single table, and so a lot of folks, I think, that are teaching this, and I would say, like, maybe if they're teaching it more academically, like you are a practitioner, so you have done this for businesses, that's where your experience is coming from. And I think when sometimes where I'd get into disagreements with academics is they'll say, like, it's so important to just go really deep on the relational relational database fundamentals, the theory, all that stuff. And to me, I do the same thing that you're talking about. I do like to get folks doing that stuff early, but day one, I say, hey, here's access to a table, play with select, start putting in some where conditions, because I think what's super important for anybody who's on this call and is like nervous and intimidating, if you go with that direction, just focus on single tables, use select, from, where, then maybe start doing some group bys and counting things and summing things, like pretty basic stuff that you've potentially done in Excel or Sheets already. You'll get some momentum and you'll go, yeah, this isn't that bad. This is, I can do this. It's basically just typing kind of what I want to do. I want to select some data from this table. It's in a very intuitive language. And then the other piece that I think you nailed, and I totally agree with, is when you get to joins, that's a hurdle that I think is much harder for a lot of people. It's where we find most of our students getting stuck. I also, like you, when I was learning, that took longer than like the single table stuff. So, get the momentum, realize that you can do this. It's actually not that intimidating, even if you're a non-coder. Like I was a non-coder learning this. And then be okay with kind of going slow and reading a lot or watching a lot of videos when you get to joins. And then realize, like, once you get your head around that, you're going to be in pretty good shape. Like, just the difference between an inner join and a left join is pretty much like, it's not crazy. And now that we know it, it's like, it's like breathing, but before you know it, it can be a little tricky. So don't get discouraged on that piece. Such good advice on all this stuff.
I make an analogy as of, let's say, if I give a math equation that involves multiplication division, and if I just give you the equation, but you didn't really learn multiplication division before, you're going to look at that, you're going to be, what is this?
Yeah,
I can't do this, and you're going to abandon. But if you know the multiplication division really well, you know multiplication tables, you know division, you're going to look at the equation, you're going to work through the problem using what you have. So,
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
yeah.
There was a good suggestion here in the chat from Mauricio about using ERDs, entity relationship diagrams. Do you use
Mhm.
ERDs much? I think sometimes people go back and forth on whether or not that's a big part of their workflow.
I think it's a good practice. I don't use all the time. I could probably get better at that. I'm going to confess I could probably get better at that. I don't use 100% of the time, but it's a good practice.
Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
I love them when like I don't use it day to day for Maven,
Mm-hmm.
but when if I'm new at a business and I have
Mm-hmm.
no idea about the data structure, I'll actually
Mm-hmm.
try to really build my own table diagrams
Yeah.
myself. And
Yeah.
so like when I'm coming into the business, I usually will
Mm-hmm.
start with kind of figure out what I think are the key tables and um,
Mm-hmm.
in the work that I usually do, that's I'm trying to go towards tables that
Mm-hmm.
store revenue or purchases,
Mm-hmm.
and then I'm
Mm-hmm.
then I'm kind of going from there, and I'm thinking, okay, where are all the places I can connect this, like
Mm-hmm.
to a customer table or a product table,
Mm-hmm.
and I sort of build my own. Like I actually use paper for this stuff usually, like a
Yeah.
little mini diagram for
Mm-hmm.
myself, and for
Mm-hmm.
me, it is just helpful. Like the diagram may already exist that the
Yeah.
company's created. Almost certainly it does, or you could like reverse engineer it just from
Mm-hmm.
the schema. But I like doing it from scratch so that those
Mm-hmm.
important joins that kind of can
Mm-hmm.
become second nature to me. So that's how I use it. But I think like Thais, I don't really use those diagrams day to day
Mm-hmm.
once I'm
Mm-hmm.
comfortable with a new company in role. So um,
Yeah.
yeah, awesome suggestions here.
Yeah.
We I think we've got a lot of questions here, so it could be
Yeah.
fun to move into
Yeah.
the Q&A portion. Before we do that, Thais, if folks
Mm-hmm.
want to hear more from you, what are the best places? What are the best places to find you?
Sure. So I'm very active on LinkedIn. You can find me there. I don't say I post every day. I post maybe once or twice a week, but I'm always commenting. You're going to always see me there on LinkedIn. And I recently launched a LinkedIn learning course that is in SQL specifically for healthcare professionals. And I remember when I first started learning SQL, I said to myself, this would be amazing in healthcare. And I started
Yeah,
imagining the amount of data and what I could do with the data. But it was very hard to find practical examples that was in the healthcare scenario for many different reasons. This thing should be just coming now. And I had to really adapt. Okay, how do I do something that's customers and orders? How do I adapt that to healthcare? So what my course does is I go through different scenarios. Healthcare is huge. There's so many areas in healthcare that you can work on. So I broke down by different scenarios, and at the end, I put a project that is specific for healthcare scenarios. And how would you use SQL, for instance, to check laboratory tests or readmission for patients? And there is a data set that, of course, is all fabricated data, obviously, of course. But there is the project there too. So it's on LinkedIn Learning. It's called SQL for Healthcare Professionals.
awesome. Yeah, so I just
Yeah.
dropped links to Thais's LinkedIn profile and to the LinkedIn course.
Mhm.
You can also, if you forget that
Mhm.
link at any point, it is linked near the top of her LinkedIn profile, so
Yeah.
you guys can grab that. So obviously, if you
Mhm.
want to be in healthcare,
Mhm.
amazing course to take. How about for
Yeah.
folks who are maybe not
Mhm.
sure what profession? Is this still a good fit for kind of like somebody just wanting to learn? Would you still recommend it for folks like that?
Oh yes,
Awesome.
absolutely. I do a brief review of SQL in the beginning of the course. Then I talk more about healthcare, but the project at the end, even though if you say, you know what, I don't know if I'm going to go into healthcare or not, am I working into something else? That's okay. It's still a practical project that you can use. There's still data sets there that you can
Yeah.
use and you can practice SQL. Absolutely.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, I think it's really important to
Hmm.
sort of just ground your learning in something practical. You're
Hmm.
actually trying to solve a specific problem. And so yeah, I think if folks just want to learn basic SQL, even if you have no interest in
Hmm.
healthcare, it's probably still a
Yeah.
very good fit. So I definitely encourage you to check that one out. And with that, let's jump into the Q&A
Mhm.
portion. So there was actually at the end of the
Sure.
chat, I think a great question that folks ask about
Mhm.
from Romero. So Thais, what do you
Mhm.
think about
Mhm.
SQL certifications? Do
Mhm.
you hold any? Do you think they're important? Do you put much weight on them for somebody who's learning?
So I think the certification is a great stepstone for you to learn the theory behind the practice.
Yep.
I have taken certifications, and yes, I mean, of course, I wasn't born knowing SQL. I wish I was, but I wasn't. So I had to go through the theory and have that certification and do that. But honestly, where I really, really got my deep learning is when I got into data sets and I started playing around with the data. I got frustrated. I, made mistakes and really play around it. I would compare that to, for instance, speaking another language. Okay, my primary language is not English. You can notice with my accent,
No,
but
you're
when I
great.
first started learning, thank you. But when I first started learning English, of course, I had to sit in English classes and learn the grammar and the syntax. But I really just got good in English was when I was in the United States talking to other
Yeah, I had to talk.
natives
Yeah.
and
Yep.
really getting that
Yep.
practice. It's very similar. Do those certifications, absolutely. I'm not going to say don't do a certification. Do it, get that. But when you get to one certification after the next, but you really didn't get your hands dirty with the data, that can be an issue. So I would do a certification, get some practice. Do another certification, get some practice. And
Yep.
that's how you're going to grow.
Yeah, I'm wondering if folks, this is probably a good one for the audience. Like, so in Power BI, there's the PL
Mhm.
300. In
Mhm.
with Excel, it's
Mhm.
MO 201. For
Mhm.
data analyst. So there's
Mhm.
some pretty well recognized and
Yeah.
centralized, like they're put up by
Mhm.
Microsoft
Yeah.
certifications. Do you have any favorites
Mhm.
that are the equivalent for SQL? And I'm curious, same question to folks in the audience, like which certifications are you guys excited about or have you pursued in the past?
I am honestly, this is a little bit on the side of SQL, but I am looking to the Azure
Yeah.
certification, which is so I am actually looking into that to get the Azure
Yep.
certification. Now, this is a different story. Those certifications they're made by Microsoft. This I would say that let's say if you're going to be a Power BI developer, get that into your resume, especially if you don't have the background into a computer science. So, like me, I didn't go to school to
Yeah.
do this. So, if you are starting, that actually carries weight. So, if I'm talking about those certifications, yes, let's say I want to be a Power BI developer. Do that certification made by Microsoft is something that you can put in your resume. That in that case, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
interesting one, like Tableau and Power BI and Excel, they have these kind of centralized ones that are pretty well
Mm-hmm.
known and they're
Yeah.
also like very data analyst focused. I've
Mm-hmm.
seen over the years, and this may have changed recently. I might be a little bit out of date, but
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the certifications like Oracle, MySQL historically have been more like database administrator focused.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so for our audience, which tends to be a little more analyst or
Mm-hmm.
data scientist focused, I don't
Mm-hmm.
usually recommend it. I mean, it could be good for. I don't recommend it as the most important thing. Like, it could be still good to
Mm-hmm.
learn those concepts, but
Yeah.
it's I just yeah, it'd be great if somebody had like
Mm-hmm.
a really analyst focused one.
Yeah.
Romero in the chat also suggested Azure, which I think is probably those are probably
Mm-hmm.
like the best fit, that the
Yeah.
corollary. Um,
Yeah.
but the other thing is like when I'm looking to hire somebody or interviewing somebody,
Mm-hmm.
typically in an interview, I'm going to give you my machine that's hooked up
Mm-hmm.
to the database, and I'm going to ask you to do something,
Mm-hmm.
so like just
Mm-hmm.
I think it's most important, make sure you can do the work,
Mm-hmm.
because it's
Yeah.
SQL, unlike a lot of other skills, you can kind of BS your way around them. This
Yeah.
is very easy to test, if
Yeah.
you're telling the truth about your skills or not in
Yes.
5 minutes. We can
Yep.
save ourselves some time. So
Yep.
um, let's check out some of these other questions. So this one's from Derek, and so Thais,
Mm-hmm.
curious your thoughts. What are some of the best SQL projects to focus on that also covers SQL concepts and commands that are commonly used? Any like specific types of projects or anywhere you would point folks?
Well, I think, especially if you're going to put a project in a portfolio, let's say that you really want to get, I don't know, let me pull an industry. Let's say you really want to get into hospitality business. Let's just
Yep.
hospitality industry. Let's just pull an industry there. I would do more projects related to that industry to be
Yeah.
more industry related and practice on that, because at the end of the day, you want to answer questions that are relevant to the business.
Yep.
So do that related to that, or like me, you came from healthcare. I would do more healthcare related because that's an industry that I know, and I would put that in a portfolio. So I would focus on projects that are related to the industry, either the industry that you are or the industry that you want to get into.
Yeah, I think that's a 10 out of 10 answer. And from the hiring manager perspective, I say I'm hiring somebody. I'm not necessarily looking to hire a data analyst. I'm looking to hire a marketing analyst or a healthcare analyst. Like, I need you to have the SQL skills, but just like Thais is saying, I need you to be able to solve a specific kind of problem. So practicing, at game speed with those actual problems that you might be solving on the job is so critical, and it can really be good ammunition for you to talk about in an interview or trying to get an interview too. Hey, I know I don't just know SQL, like I know how to solve healthcare problems with SQL. So like that's the person that they're looking for. Romero is talking about the analytics trifecta. We often talk about having the technical skills, the sort of the business acumen or strategic thinking, and then also communication skills. And projects can be one of the best places where you can actually showcase all three at the same time. So yeah, that's a great shout out there. How about this one from Elena? Thais, I'm curious your thoughts. Do you have any steps to follow to verify that your joins have worked as expected, especially when you're combining many tables? It's a really good one.
Well, this, I'm going to say, I collaborate there a lot with people. Let's say if I use a specific application, that's where my data is. I collaborate with the people that use and say, hey, I have run a query, is bringing me those results. Can I check to make sure that this is matching? So I do validation usually with the end user, with who is not necessarily the stakeholder, not that, but somebody that, in this example, somebody that uses the application, or if I have access to the application. Okay, let me ensure that this is working. Initially do a spot checking to see, but eventually if I say, okay, the spot checking is good, it is, it's working fine, then I try to match to see if the SQL results are matching with, let's say, what I have as real life data as the end result. And I also collaborate and try to have that peer reviewed as well, and say, hey, did I miss anything here? This is my logic, because maybe somebody that works with that data too and sees that in a different angle might catch something that I missed. So collaboration here plays a very big role. I mean, remember that we as data analysts, we think that we're just doing this all day and, with a hoodie, just, doing this all day. But collaborating with your peers is
so important.
It's awesome to get to the final results. And yes, like in this example is joins, but it's for pretty much anything else to see that there's something in the query that is not working, or you nailed this query. So
working with folks is so important. I do have some thoughts on kind of the joins and how they might bust your query, and so I'll share some how to try to prevent it, and then also some like QA methods. So one, I think the biggest thing that I eventually got my head around early on was if you stick to doing joins on primary key to foreign key relationships that are built for that join, then you're in great shape, and you really shouldn't have any problems. That's not necessarily true. You might get wrong an inner join or a left join when you didn't think so, but the where you can get in trouble is, like, let's say you were talking about customer data before. Let's say you had maybe a payments table that has a customer ID in it, and then you also have, say, like a courses completed table with a customer ID. But one customer can have multiple payments, and they can have multiple courses completed. So like, just some people think, oh, there's this customer ID value that's an integer that's meant for joining, and they see I can join that to anywhere that also has the customer ID value. But if, let's say in that example, if customer ID being a foreign key on the payments table and on a courses table, you might get just a massive data set because you basically cross multiplied it. So I've done that before. So try to avoid that. Only do primary to foreign key mapping. And then I love just the pretty simple way of, I try to like just do a very simple query to QA, like pull all the joins out, like I look at the revenue. If I'm looking at revenue at a customer level, sum that up, and then just do an overall query that's so simple and doesn't have joins. And does that query match? So, check your work a little bit too, I think is good advice. So yeah, hopefully that's helpful on that one. Let's see. Let's see. So this one's from Arash. After studying and learning, can you practice without having actual business questions or objectives? Should we just repeat again and again to master the syntax? I feel lost when I want to practice what I've learned. What do you think about this? A really interesting question. I think I know what you're going to say, but
how to practice without having. Well, honestly, I think okay, I'm going to say Maven Analytics has the data playground. That's some not real life, I'm sorry. There's some data examples there with business questions, and you can go there. And there is also different sources of data that you can do. And yes, I would say before you even jump in there, repeat those syntaxes, try to get there, wrap around your brain, and then you get your hands dirty for the data. And if you get frustrated, and that's actually good, getting frustrated, that means you're learning something. And yes, so I would recommend doing that.
Yeah, I think it's similar to your answer before, like just don't fall into the trap of thinking you don't have real problems. Like there are things available. You should kind of create your own problems. And I think your advice before, that if you're interested in a specific industry, go get some data on that industry, is like some of the best advice you could give somebody. So Akash, hopefully you can invent some of your own problems. And like Thais mentioned, you can go to the Maven Analytics Data Playground. That's a good one for if you're kind of beginner and you don't necessarily have a specific industry. It gives you a bunch of good data sets that we've curated. If you really did have like a very specific industry that you want, Data Playground might have something, but doesn't have that much. But Kaggle and Data.world have like thousands of data sets, and they're searchable. So if you're like, I want to be in hospitality, I want to be in healthcare, I'd say go and grab some data sets from there and like stick to your industry as soon as you feel comfortable kind of doing projects on your own would be awesome.
Yeah. Another thing really interesting to do that I have done in the past is analyze personal data. It's super interesting. I did a project a while ago that was analyzing my sleep patterns to see, loss of sleep, or what was causing me to lose sleep. And, if I slept a certain amount of hours a night that was less than 7-8 hours, how would I feel the next day? Would that impact me or not? So it's fascinating. So people that like to, runners or like to work out, you can also analyze that data. You can find personal data too. That makes so interesting. And I think especially when you're in the beginning, do something like this that's going to grab your interest too.
Yeah, that's awesome. And talk about talk about a high impact thing. If you could figure out how to impact your sleep, right? Like something that benefits everybody.
Yes,
awesome.
absolutely.
How about this one? This question's from Grace. How would you best prepare for a live coding interview in SQL?
Well, I would so practice the basics. I personally have not done a live SQL coding, but I I can imagine it's nerve-wracking. I can imagine that, but just practice the basic. Chances are, when you get to a SQL live coding, they are not going to ask you crazy things to join 10 tables at once. Chances are they're not going to ask that. I hope,
Yep.
but just stay calm, do your code, and try to narrate your code and explain what you're doing. Hey, I'm selecting this column. Now I'm going to do a count because of that's what you want me to do in this question,
Yeah.
and so on. And try to walk through and explain
Yep.
to the person how you're doing the coding. And the same way that you'd be talking to yourself a little bit when you're doing
Yep.
the code, but now you're verbalizing that. So,
Yeah, I love that. And that, whether it's like a SQL
mhm,
coding interview or a Power BI interview, or even just like a business problem solving type
mhm,
case study, um, I think
mhm,
talking out loud and sharing what's going on inside your head is like probably the
mhm,
best advice.
yeah,
Because if you're not and you're just quiet, it's such a weird
mhm,
interview.
yeah,
And part of the case interviews like this is to understand, yeah, hey, does she have the skills to do this job? The other part is to
mhm,
start to get a feel for like, what's it like to work with
yeah,
her or him?
yeah,
Does this seem fun? Can they communicate well? And
yeah,
so, like we said in that analyst trifecta, this is another good
mhm,
example where you can do your technical skills and show off your communication skills. And can you explain why you're doing it?
mhm,
Which I think is really huge. Another piece that I'd suggest too
mhm,
is
mhm,
the company that you're going in for, you
yeah,
could probably intuitively think about like, hey, they want to hire me as an analyst. What are the types of problems that an analyst might do for this company? And then you can
mhm,
say, okay, so what are the types of tables that I might be using at this
mhm,
company? And
mhm,
I think even if you're sort of armed with that proactive thinking, that can go a long
mhm,
way too, and
mhm,
make you look good. And then the last thing
yeah,
I'll say for folks, if you were in the interview
mhm,
um, and it seems hard,
mhm,
then that could mean you're like super not prepared, or it could mean you're doing
mhm,
great, and the person is
yeah,
really trying to push you and see how hard you can
mhm,
go. Because I've had that happen to me one
true.
time before, where I just got demolished, and it was so hard at the end, and this guy was doing things, and I'm like, I can't believe I did so poorly on this interview. Like, I've been using SQL for 6 or 7 years, and then later I got the job, and he talked,
Mhm,
and he was like, you were
mhm,
best best person that's done this, so I was just putting you through the ringer. So sometimes if they give up and they stop testing you, that actually might be
mhm,
bad. If they're pushing you hard, that's actually
mhm.
probably the best sign in the world. So don't get
Yeah.
spooked if it's getting hard. um let's see. Let's do one more. We've got time for from
Mhm,
Catherine here.
mhm,
What are
mhm.
some of the common challenges faced by beginners when they're learning SQL, and how can you overcome them?
I think when you first learn SQL, I think, like I said, that fear of missing out, that you want to do everything and you want to I want to get into window functions right away. I want to, so I think the challenge that you have to do is to really start from the beginning, from the basics, and get that really well. Like I said, the joins, it's and the joins really spend some time, and not only joins, I'm pounding on joins, I think, because that's what happened to me, but if
Same.
you have a yeah, that's what happened to me. That's why I'm so much in the joins. But let's say that you don't understand case statement, how it works. Just, you know, work through that, and let's say that you are learning a certain way, but it's still not making sense. Look for the sources where it's going to be the same message, but it's going to be communicated a different way to
Mm,
you, which is okay. that's the beauty of this. There's so many different ways you can communicate the message. What might work so well for you might not work that well for another person. So that person is going to recommend you, oh, use this channel, use this platform, and you go and you try, man, it still doesn't make any sense. Try a different platform, try a different channel, and eventually you're going to see it's the same message, it's just a communication. We're all different, so it's just the way that it's communicated to you. So try different approaches to the same problem and just move forward once you get to that done.
I love it. Yeah, we're all
Yeah.
different. Like some people might read a blog post, some people might watch a video, some people might ask ChatGPT.
Yeah.
It's such good advice. We're all different, and
Yeah.
even you might be different on different days and stuff like that. So really, really good advice to end on, folks. I hope you found this useful. Thais, you were amazing. Tons of valuable stuff here for our audience. I hope you've inspired some folks to take action. And thank you so much for joining us here today. We'll love to do this with you again in the future.
Of course. Thank you. Anytime.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.